All right, welcome to the Exam 1 review for sports nutrition. My name's Andy Sykes, Associate Director, Sports Nutrition Specialist. So we're going to talk about the review today. And so we'll get started. I'll share a screen having those bullet points for Exam 1, and then just quickly talk through those. And if you have any questions, shoot me an email and we can talk further about those. So let me share this screen. All right, you should be able to see the Word document here, everything that's in there. So starting with those 6 nutrients, hopefully you know those by now, pretty basic. But we've got our macros first off: protein, carbs, fat, and then our micronutrients, vitamins, minerals, and then water being the main one for number 6. Like, good segue there, going into water and its role in the body. Well, we try to be around 60% water as a percentage of body weight. The more muscle you have, the more water you're going to retain, because that muscle is a storage of water. More fat, high body fat percentage is going to show lower water percentages. So we're trying to get that number up. Its role in the body: cell structure, dissolve of nutrients to then transport that structure, temperature regulation, so why we sweat when we do. A reactive medium, as I said, things dissolve, and that within that is acid and water being neutral, and the flow of acid into fluid, into blood, and moving it around, so being a medium for all of those reactions. Like I said, it's a main component of blood and urine, so controlling fluid balance in the body is another function of water. We see decreases in performance with as little as 2 to 3% body weight loss. So if you weigh 150 pounds, that's 1.5 pounds would be 1%. So you're talking 3 to 4.5 pounds would be 2 to 3%. If you lose that in a day, you're going to see changes in performance levels. So that's quite easy to do, is drop 3 pounds, and that will affect performance. How calories are calculate calories in food, and what is a calorie? Again, hopefully you know this by now, but a calorie is a unit of energy. When we consume macronutrients, we receive that energy. We metabolize some of it. We burn some of it up just by metabolizing the food, and that creates our metabolism. And then we should know that the macronutrients hold energy, right? They have calorie content. So protein is 4 calories per gram, fat is 9 calories per gram, carbohydrates are 4 calories per gram. Those are the ones you really know. Alcohol is 7 calories per gram, but we won't really talk about it within sports nutrition. Don't want to be drinking that when you're exercising. There is 4.186 joules to a calorie. So if you wanted to kind of convert it to plugging in your phone at the wall and seeing how long it takes to charge a phone with voltage and watts, 4.186 joules is 1 calorie, and we consume 2 to 3,000 calories a day. So you can work that out. Next up, what we got: functions of nutrients. So just depending on which one we're talking about. But again, these macros, we talked water, let's go into protein. Protein's got the role of the doing in the body, right? It's building structure, immune system, repairing the body. It creates enzymes that break down the food. It creates peptide hormones that roll in our metabolism as well. Insulin and glucagon are 2 peptide hormones. The catecholamines, epinephrine and norepinephrine, are protein-based as well. So they come from the adrenal glands and are peptide-based. What about, you've got fat? Okay, it's rolling mainly energy, but also, insulation, hair and nail nourishment, taste, satiety. So it's keeping us feeling fuller for longer. And so functions of fat: carbohydrate, mainly high intensity energy substrate, used for the brain, used for exercise. That's the role of carbohydrate. Macronutrient metabolism, so the breakdown, enzymes, acid transporters, diffusion, absorption rates. I actually do have on Blackboard kind of a cheat sheet for each of the 3 macronutrients. So look at that for this question. But it starts with the breakdown in the mouth when you consume any food. You've got enzymes, amylase and lipase in the saliva. So that would be the first one of the enzymes that would interact. You swallow that. you're going to interact with hydrochloric acid, gastric lipase in the stomach. Okay, you then push into the small intestines, you're getting different things happening, cholecystokinin being released, you've got secretin, you've got pancreatic lipase, pancreatic amylase, they're going to come through from the pancreas, brush border disaturates, all sorts of these enzymes that are interacting. Again, go through the slides and really look at that. There's a lot to kind of digest in that those 3 chapters: carbs, protein, fat. But again, the cheat sheets on Blackboard are going to be really helpful here at looking at how those break down. Transporters, big one is the sodium glucose transporter for glucose. It's an active transport. Both glucose and galactose use that. So knowing sodium glucose transporter 1, but there's many different glucose transporters, GLUT we call them, that are in the body. And you have passive diffusion, you have facilitated diffusion, so through a protein gate, but passively. And then you have active transport, so through a protein gate with energy use. And so that's the ones we look at. Absorption rates, the only one we've really talked about is carbohydrate at roughly gram a minute. So that comes into play with during exercise, of how much carbohydrate we want to consume during exercise, about a gram a minute, so we can maintain utilization. Components of the GI tract: mouth, esophagus, stomach, small intestines, duodenum, jejunum, ileum, large intestines, ascending, transverse, and descending colon into anus. So those are components. We also involving in that is your gallbladder, your pancreas, that are doing a lot of different roles in the metabolism of your food through there. I think that's the main ones we're talking about there. And the kidneys as well with the excretion. Fates of carbohydrate, fat, protein once ingested. In terms of fates, I mean, in terms of storage or utilization, any carb's going to turn to glucose, whether it be fructose, galactose, or glucose as a carbohydrate. That happens in the liver, is then stored as glycogen or released as glucose into the blood and then stored as glycogen. If the stores are full and you don't need energy and the active state of the cell is low, then it can be used for a glycerol backbone turn into storage of fat. Fats breakdown is to fatty acids, and so they are stored as a triglyceride throughout. So whether they're moving around as free fatty acids, but then storage is a triglyceride, or they get used as energy, Krebs cycle. So they get stored or used. Protein will break down to amino acids. So we got individual amino acids in an amino acid pool in the blood, and any cell can pick these up, and they go through that utilization through the nucleus and the ribosomes that construct these proteins through picking out these different amino acids in transcription. So that's a role that your nucleus of the cell has, and every cell has that. So that's the fate of protein. Hormones' role in metabolism. We've talked about a few, not all of them yet. We talked about insulin, okay, and that's commonly talked about because of diabetes. But insulin helps upregulate the intake of sugar. So when sugar spikes because you've eaten a carbohydrate-heavy meal, insulin's released from the pancreas beta cells, and that helps the uptake of glucose out of the blood into storage as glycogen. The opposite of insulin is glucagon, which is the opposite. It's when your blood sugar is low, glucagon's released, and that helps release stored glycogen into blood glucose to keep blood glucose levels the same. We want them at roughly the same level throughout, or things start malfunctioning in the body. Too high is not good, too low is not good either. Hyper and hypoglycemia. Other hormones, we talked about epinephrine, norepinephrine. Those are adrenal hormones from the adrenal gland, and those help with stimulation. They help get our heart rate up, our breathing rate, our sweat rate, blood pressure. Those are the ones that get us stimulated and aroused for activity, especially when we're speaking about that in terms of exercise. We've also mentioned cortisol a little bit. That's another hormone, a catabolic hormone that helps the breakdown and degradation of storage fuel. So again, it's releasing fat, it's releasing carbohydrate. It's normally highest in the mornings because we've gone hopefully 8 hours of fasted at least through the night while we're sleeping. Yeah, so then diabetes, and we just mentioned insulin, but that's connected there. Two types of diabetes. Type 1, pancreatic dysfunction, something's not working right there, and it's not releasing insulin. Type 2, which is more common, is insulin is being released. It's just being not listened to, basically. The messenger isn't getting to open up those GLUT4 cells, which is what insulin does. It helps upregulate glucose out of the blood. And it does that by communicating to the cell walls and opening up transporter gates. And that type 2 diabetes is insulin is not being listened to. It is released. It has just become so habitual that you've built a tolerance to it and it no longer works and you become insulin resistant. Energy used for mechanical work is ATP, so adenosine triphosphate, understanding that, and that goes straight into the next few, which is all about energy and the energy systems. Basal metabolic rate, resting metabolic rate. Basal is the minimum amount of energy to keep you alive. Okay, so pretty much no movement at all, maybe not even conscious thought. Think hospital bed, ventilator. What is the minimum we need well, how much calories are you burning to maintain life? And then resting metabolic rate is more of an estimated average when you could lay down in bed and just maintaining pretty conscious thought, really, and pretty minimal, very similar numbers, but one is like bare minimum for sustaining life and one is at rest. Energy efficiency, I talked about this and how I compared us to a car and how hot a car gets and how hot we don't get, and using energy. We are pretty efficient, about 40% efficiency, meaning that we use about 60% of the energy we consume to actually keep our body warm and metabolize food and to stay alive. The energy systems, we should know a phosphagen system being the fastest. Its input is the storage of ATP. That breaks down through hydrolysis to ADP, and then we can phosphorylate that with an enzyme, adenylate kinase, and then you can also use creatine there with creatine kinase to phosphorylate and to create that ATP molecule again. The second system is glycolysis, rapid glycolysis, starts with glucose or glycogen, goes through a 10-step process where we end up with pyruvate, and that is one way, or goes into lactate if it's very rapid. Along the way, you're picking up ATP molecules, you're also picking up some hydrogens that go to electron transport chain, and they create an acidic environment, which we try to resist, and that's what causes fatigue. If it's slow enough and it's not rapid glycolysis, then it becomes aerobic energy production, and pyruvate can enter the Krebs cycle through as it converts to acetyl-CoA and go through that system where, again, we pick up more ATP molecules, more hydrogens, and then they get shuttled to the electron transport chain where we make further energy. So if that was glucose, we mentioned that, and then fat, we break it down to fatty acids, goes through beta oxidation, cleaving off 2 carbons each time, and can enter the Krebs cycle once it's acetyl-CoA. Protein, amino acids, they can be plugged into a few different spots on the Krebs cycle, but it can also go through gluconeogenesis in the liver and then shuttle again through as glucose through that system, whether that be that slow glycolysis in the Krebs cycle. So phosphagen, anaerobic, and aerobic energy production, 3 different systems. Gluconeogenesis I just mentioned, and that is the change of any non-carbohydrate substrate to glucose. So this happens with lactate, this happens with different amino acids, and so you can create glucose in the liver from those. Acronyms of populations they account for. We've heard of an RDA, recommended daily allowance, that accounts for 97.5% of the population. An EAR, the estimated average requirement, 50% of the population. We've talked about AMDRs, the acceptable macro distribution range, so what percent of the calorie content of food should be that macronutrient. And we've talked about other dietary reference intakes, DRIs, which we talked about just then. Adequate intakes, so some foods don't have RDAs, and if they don't have an RDA, they normally have an AI, which is adequate intake. What should you ingest? And you also see some upper tolerable limits when you talk about minerals or vitamins that don't ingest too much, it become toxic or it can hurt your system, and there's an upper limit to that. Ranking and scaling systems of carbohydrates and proteins. Start with the carbohydrates. We talk about how quickly they turn to glucose in the blood, and that is a glycemic index. So a high GI, meaning it dissolves and becomes glucose very quickly, and a low GI is a more complex carb, takes longer to break down, slower use of glucose into the blood. Protein, we look, and then next with the glycemic index, you've got glycemic load, which is the quantity that you're consuming, as well as the how fast it is going to be released. So you times it by the amount that you consume. With protein, we look at the biological value. So that looks at how much nitrogen is retained in the body. So understanding nitrogen as a part of an amino acid. And then when we consume it, we increase nitrogen in the body. And then when we defecate, how much is leaving the body, and hopefully we have a positive balance. So biological value, and then the PDCAA, the protein digestibility corrected amino acid score, looks at the amount of fiber basically in a protein and how quickly it's going to transport through the GI tract. And the quicker, the less protein you're going to get out of it, because you don't quite have time to metabolize it and absorb all of its nutrients. So those are how we scale them. The different amino acids, we've pulled those up in class. We have 20 different amino acids. We have essential, meaning you must consume them. There's 9 of those, and not essential, 11 of those that can be made by the human body, providing you have the essential. I highlight a few additional ones, which are your branch chain amino acids, leucine, isoleucine, and valine. Those are special because they are branch chained and they can be used for energy inside the muscle cell. So these are commonly used as an intra-workout, where it doesn't have to undergo gluconeogenesis to then become an energy substrate. So pretty cool in that. And then we have some conditionally essential amino acids as well, which providing you've got the essential, you can make the non-essential. So we brought those up in class, and there's a slide that highlights those. Protein synthesis. We talked about this as an amino acid is pulled in from the blood into a cell. It's given a role and becomes part of a larger protein structure. Okay, and how does that happen? Well, you have your nucleus inside the cell has instructions through the DNA. RNA is a messenger, as a copy of that. It's going to basically have those instructions, and they taken to the ribosome. The ribosome constructs that protein and pulls those amino acids in a process called transcription. Okay, so tRNA grabs the amino acid, pulls it into the ribosome, and we start connecting those amino acids together to make a sequence and a new protein structure, whatever that be, based on the nucleus's need for whatever it is they want. Exercise adaptations are just changes that your body's going to make based on the stress you put on it. One of the things I talked about so far in this class is the crossover point of fat utilization for energy to carbohydrate utilization for energy, and how males generally want to use carbs a little sooner, so they have a lower crossover point, females a little higher. But the more you use it, the better it gets. Knowing that we use fat at low intensities as your main fuel substrate, and as intensity increases, we shift to carbohydrate reliance. So that's one of the main things I want you to pull out of that. Knowing the RDAs, so real easy, make sure you know these. Let's start with carbohydrate. How much does your brain need? 130 grams a day. There's also other recommendations that between 3 and 12 grams per kilogram. So if you're really sedentary, around 3 grams per kilogram, all the way up to 12 grams per kilogram if you're very, very active, and that's more of a carb load. So like running a marathon, how much do you need to carb load? Around 12 grams per kilogram. So somewhere in between that range is quite a large range. You also have AMDR, right? It's acceptable macro distribution range. It is not the RDA, but knowing it 45 to 55%, 45 to 65% for the average population, and athletes can have a little more. Protein, 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight is the recommendation for protein. It can go all the way up to 2 grams per kilogram for some athletes. Again, the slides will show you that. For fat, the acceptable macro distribution range is between 10 and 35% for protein. We have fat, which doesn't have an RDA. We don't necessarily need a certain amount of fat, but we do have an AMDR, which is between 20 and 35% of your calories should come from fat. There is an RDA for 2 fatty acids. If you remember the omega-3 and omega-6, commonly known as just fish oils, we need 1.1 and 1.6 grams per day for females and males respectively for omega-3, and 12 and 17 grams a day for females and males respectively for omega-6. So knowing the amount that we should consume. So yeah, and fat, like I said, as AMDR there too, yeah, of 20 to 35%. Let me see if any other notes. I think we went through everything here. So there you are. There you have it. That will be our review today for exam 1. Best of luck as you take that exam. Let me know if you have any questions. Send me an email. Come by the office and we'll be happy to chat with you and talk more about nutrition. Have a good day.